Alright, so let's just do a very quick overview of how the brushes work here in Substance Painter. I'm going to make a new fill, and we'll just make it red, and then another fill on top of that, and this one I'm going to make blue, or purple, and then I'm going to add a black mask, and then into the black mask I am going to add a paint. So we'll go to the brush menu, and we'll start with the basic hard brush, and it looks like that. We've sort of maybe seen this already. And if I go to the basic soft, we can see that it looks kind of like that. So we get a little bit more of a diffuse edge there. And there's really only one setting that separates these two brushes. I'm going to go to basic hard with my properties menu open, and you can see down here we have this hardness slider. And I can get a preview of what the resulting brush stroke is going to look like right up here. So just by changing this one value, we can get two different results there. And the reason that it's circular is because I have this alpha here. The alpha is going to be basically a filter for the end of the brush. If I get rid of it, we get a square, which is basically just the default state of the brush with nothing on it. So I'll hit Control Z a couple times, and we'll go over to the alphas menu, because it'll be a little bit easier to see what's going on with some of these settings if I grab a more noticeable alpha. So I can just simply drag and drop directly onto the alpha field in the brush menu. Now that I've got that set, we can see if I do a click and drag what's happening. So let's start at the top. So we have size. That's pretty obvious, and you can see I've got a slider for it up here as well if you've got this menu pulled off somewhere. I've got flow. So what flow is going to do is it is going to basically give me this sort of stacking. As the strokes overlap, the opacity will increase. And if I turn flow back up to the value of 100 and then I reduce opacity down, you can see there is no stacking. We're getting basically a full fill. Well, I don't know, maybe there's something going on up there, but that looks like it might be something, basically just a little bit of a fade there. But so that's the difference between flow and opacity, very similar, but they do have some differences. We've got spacing, and you can see what's happening here in my stroke. If I wanted to get something like that, I can reduce the spacing. So this is useful for things like stitching. Let's see, we'll set the spacing down to 0 again, and then, well, let me add a little bit more. Then we've got these jitters. So we have size jitter. So the more this is increased, we're going to get basically just a randomness in the size. We've got flow jitter, and so that'll give us a randomness in the flow value. The angle jitter, which will give us some various rotations, and then the position. So it's just going to kind of pop it off around proximate to your stroke, but not exactly on there. And let's see, we've got some, we talked about hardness already, and then this is just your value. So we're either painting it at full opacity or half opacity. So half opacity and reducing the opacity up here, that's basically going to give you the same thing. Hopefully that all makes sense. So a lot of these brushes here, they already have all that stuff kind of pre-built. So we can just start with something common, one of these dirts. We'll use dirt splash. And you can see, if I scroll back up, we have a whole ton of variation here built into this brush. And that is what the result looks like. I'm just holding Shift and right mouse button to change the angle of the camera. If you want to draw a straight line in Substance Painter, you can just hold Shift, you click, hold Shift, and then click again. And it'll give you a straight line. That's a left mouse button click. So click, Shift, and then click again. Some other brushes that I like a lot, one of them is called Sandpaper. And it'll give you this like lovely, subtle scratching effect. Elephant Skin, something kind of similar. Just a nice dust, almost like a paint fading or something. It's really very useful for old cars, that kind of stuff. Another one that I like a lot is Mold. Let me back out of here with a couple of undos. So that's what Mold looks like, and you can see it's getting applied to the surface according to the camera angle. And there are lots and lots and lots of them. So you can come over and you can see we've got all these. Here's a nice hatching one. And they all work, well, not all of them, but they oftentimes will work nicely together. So let me do like, we'll go back to one of these dirts. I'm going to reduce the opacity a little bit. And then you can come over with like a hatching and set the value to the other way. So we're basically like adding the paint back in now. So you can combine them to get some really nice results. So this is certainly one approach. It can be, you can get a really nice result this way, but it is also a little bit labor intensive, and you can get a similar result using procedural solutions, which is what I'm going to show you now. So we'll go ahead and just set this back to being a black mask. I'll add a paint. Actually, I'm going to leave it as is. What I'm going to add instead is a smart mask. So we can come down here to the smart mask section, and there are lots and lots of presets here. So we'll just look at dirt cavities. And you can, if you mouse over, you can kind of see what the result is going to be. I'm going to click and drag into the mask, and everywhere that it is blue, it's basically the mask is opaque. Everywhere else it is transparent. So this is a nice way that you can begin to add dirt and grunge and stuff to your geometry without having to actually do anything by hand. Let me show you another example here. We'll go to dust occlusion. It's very subtle. Cavity rust. That's a little bit more intense. One of them I think is called like gun edges or something, and it's pretty useful. There we go, gun edges. Just for giving like a chipped paint feeling. So the nice thing about all of these is they are created using generators. And you can modify the settings. So let me come over to like edges dusty, we'll drop it in, and I'm going to click on this mask editor here, and in the properties you'll see we get all of these ways that we can modify this mask. So I'm going to hold Alt and click on the mask, and we can see everywhere again that it is not black, that is some value of visibility. So if it's full white, it's fully opaque, and if it's fully black, it's fully transparent. So if I wanted to modify this, what you can do is go into my balance. You can blur it. You can increase the contrast. The contrast is basically going to remove the values that are not either further to the darker side or further to the lighter side. So having done that, if I tap M, you can see this is what we're getting now. So like I could have gone through and painted all this stuff, or you can just use a generator. So I will almost always try to make a generator work before jumping to painting anything. And you can combine this stuff as well. So if I come over and I add a fill here, and I'm going to just go to, you can either use grunges or procedurals. I think procedurals tend to tile and grunges don't. Grunges are usually sourced from like photos or like natural things. So they have a more realistic look oftentimes, but they do have the downside of borders. So if that matters, you might want to go with something that's in the procedural section. But in this case, I'm looking for something that's just sort of high contrast. So I'm going to just drag this one up. And you can see what's happening there. It's kind of being applied. Well, it's not kind of. It's absolutely being applied with a UV projection. So we're getting these hard seams according to our UV layout. We can simply change this to triplanar projection. And then we'll get that same thing where like you might see some stretching on some of the edges that are pointing at 45-degree angles relative to the world space. But otherwise, we don't get any seams, and that's very, very nice. So what I'm going to do here to combine these is I need to modify my layer blending. So I've got the default here is set to normal, but I can do a multiply. And the way multiply works is anything that is white will be preserved in either side, and anything that's black is going to be knocked out, because basically whenever you multiply something by 1, which is the value of white, it stays, it's basically unmodified, and whenever you multiply it by 0, it turns to 0. So in either one of these, if there's a multiply above it, it's going to basically, wherever you've got black, it's going to make the final result black, and wherever you've got white, it's going to leave it. So it's a way to sort of knock out stuff from one layer by modifying another layer. So what I'm going to do is I want to kind of increase my contrast here. So you can just go to the balance. And you can see how we're basically removing those little values. So this is all at this point just playing with this these two random things may be a little bit abstract, but when you get into actual texturing with it, it's a very, very powerful tool and a really, really flexible approach to creating believable wear and dirt and grunge and all the rest of that stuff in your texturing without having to go through and paint everything by hand.